Hello, everyone. Welcome in. This is Brett with Digital Energy, where we talk about Bitcoin, crypto assets, and the digital revolution. Today, we're going to be talking about why everyone in the world really should be very concerned about the amount of money printing that's going on at present and how devastating that can be to the world economies. And a little bit of good news in that perhaps Bitcoin can help save us from ourselves. Before we begin, just the mandatory disclaimers. The opinions and information presented in this video are strictly for entertainment and general informational purposes. Nothing in this video is intended to be nor should be construed as financial or legal advice. Your financial decisions in your personal life need to be your decisions based on your research. So yeah, let's jump right in. I think I'd like to begin with a chart here that I think is really shocking. This is a chart of the M2 money supply showing how that supply has increased over time. And just a really brief history, I think most people know that the United States for many years was on a gold standard. The decay of the gold standard in the United States started in 1933 when President Franklin Delano Roosevelt issued a executive order essentially confiscating all gold, making it illegal to hold or own gold, and making it so that you could not exchange your paper dollars for gold as you could before. Fast forward to 1971 when President Nixon truly took us off of the gold standard. The United States currency was no longer backed by an equivalent value in gold, and the United States dollar became a fiat currency, in other words, a currency that was backed only by the faith and credit of the United States government. And you can see that starting in 71, well, as soon as we came off the gold standard, the government started printing more money. And this is not something new. Governments and rulers of the past have done the same thing. It just seems like our governments cannot resist the temptation when they have fiat currency to just print more and more of it as they need it. The problem with that is that it really debases the currency, it makes the currency worth less, and is really a form of hidden taxation, or even some people call it a form of theft. As more money is printed, the purchasing power of the dollar you have in your wallet becomes less, and you can buy less. And you can see as time went on, the government continued to print more and more. I think if you fast forward to 2008, what we see is that there was a small little blip up here, right here, to handle the 2008 real estate crisis. But then let's take a look at 2020 when COVID hit and the government believed that the way that they could combat COVID and the economic stresses that it put on the economy was by printing money, and we just simply went parabolic. One thing that's pretty shocking to realize if you take a look at this graph is back in about 2008, our money supply was sitting at about $8 trillion. Today, we're nearly 22 trillion, so drastic increase. And you can see we've gone from less than 16 trillion to almost 22 trillion just in the last 2 years. Pretty shocking. And so the question is, should we be concerned? Well, if history is any teacher, then yes, we should. Some of the most powerful economies of the world in our history have been collapsed by inflation, one of those being the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was financed primarily by the silver Roman denarius, which was a coin that started off being 95% pure silver. But as the empire aged and as wars and other things began to spread across the region, the government needed money to fight those wars. And so what did the Roman government do? They essentially printed more money. Now in their case, what they did is as they created new silver coins, they would just put baser metals in those coins. That way they could produce more with less silver. And in fact, as it states here, by the year 265 AD, the silver denarius had gone from 95% silver to just 0.5% silver. Got so bad that the Roman soldiers wouldn't even take the Roman coin for their pay. and ultimately the inflation and hyperinflation that occurred in Rome, in the Roman Empire, was a big part of its downfall. Another really interesting story about debasement of a currency happened to Spain in the 1600s. They had discovered the Americas, and with that, the Inca and Aztec cultures that had just huge stores of gold and many gold mines throughout the Americas. And so the Spaniards began to mine gold and confiscate gold to a point where they really flooded the world with gold. And because the world was flooded with gold, the law of supply and demand kicked in, and gold values plummeted. And that ended up throwing most of Europe into an economic collapse because of this huge amount of gold that was flooded into the market. Now, fast forward again, 1918, end of World War I. Germany is needing money to finance the war. And up until this time, their mark, their money system, their German mark, was on a gold standard. They decided to change that and issue a paper or a fiat mark. Some call it a paper mark or a Reichsmark, but they took it off the gold standard. And of course, as governments do, the German government was no different. They needed the money. They continued to print more and more German marks, paper marks, and that caused inflation and ultimately hyperinflation. Here's a little photo that I thought was interesting from back at that time. You can see here that 3 eggs, it looks like, cost 40,000 paper marks. It had to pay 40,000 paper marks for looks like maybe a head of cauliflower or something. But ultimately, the currency became so worthless that it was just thrown into the street. It meant nothing, had no value. And here's a pretty shocking graph that looks actually quite a bit like the graph we just looked at earlier, to show how this inflation and hyperinflation came into being over several years. So January 1st of 1918, paper mark is introduced. It takes about a year and a half for the paper mark to lose value to where it's only that there's 10 paper marks to every gold mark. Then it only took a little bit longer, maybe a year and a half more, to go to 100 times, and then it becomes exponential, and just hyperinflation kicks in. One stat that I read indicated that in 1922, a loaf of bread cost 160 paper marks. A year later, in 1923, that same loaf of bread cost 200 billion paper marks. So, just led to hyperinflation and complete collapse of that monetary system. And that brings us to us today. The U.S. is printing money at an unprecedented rate, not to fight a war against any other country or anything like that, but to fight a war against COVID. And before that, in 2008, to fight a war against an potential economic collapse. And so I think we ask ourselves, how concerned do we need to be when we see this type of increase in our monetary system, and when history tells us that this cannot end well if we keep going down this path. Now, the question is why haven't we experienced inflation to the extent of, say, in Germany, or to the extent of the Romans or the Spaniards? Well, one of the saving graces that we have today is that we are in an unprecedented age of technological advance. And technology in and of itself is deflationary. So on the one hand, you have the inflationary effects of the money printing, but on the other hand, you have counterbalancing that the deflationary effects of technology. And you can think of that in these terms. We know that back in the 1960s, computers were the size of a house. They cost millions and millions of dollars. Today, everyone in the world practically has a computer in their hand. that costs a few $100s, that's orders of magnitude more powerful than the original computer. So that's a good example of how technology is deflationary. But obviously something has to give. At some point, we don't know when that some point is, but if we keep going down this path of printing money, at some point, technology may not be able to keep up, and it may be a devastating result if history repeats itself. So, how can Bitcoin save the world, and am I the only one that believes it can? Well, no, there are others. Here's an article by a fairly prominent investor, Tim Draper. He also believes that cryptocurrencies, and in particular Bitcoin, can save us from ourselves and our propensity to just always print more money and debase our currencies. And so the question is, how? How does it do it? How can Bitcoin save the world, save us from ourselves? Well, I think what we need to understand, if you understand nothing else about Bitcoin, is that Bitcoin is the first major advancement in money technology in the last 5,000 years. And I'm referring to gold. 5,000 years ago, gold was accepted essentially around the world as a form of money. And ever since then, we really haven't been able to find anything better until now. And it's because of our technological advances of blockchain technology and the internet that we are able to have produced Bitcoin. Some pretty smart people did it. And the one thing that you need to understand about Bitcoin above all else is that Bitcoin can never be debased. It can never be devalued. No government can make more of it. No central authority can make more. There is a strictly limited supply of Bitcoin. And so we essentially take away the very thing that has caused monetary inflation in the past. As I mentioned, there's a fixed supply. There will only ever be, because of the way the technology works, there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin mined. And sometimes, and some of those Bitcoin can be lost to time if people lose their personal keys or don't tell people where they keep their Bitcoin or how they store it. Those Bitcoin can be lost, and so the supply can actually go down. As I mentioned, Bitcoin is completely decentralized. This is a central theme of its technology. It's not controlled by a central government. It cannot be controlled by a large institution. The rules of how Bitcoin work cannot be changed by a single individual because of the way the technology is rolled out across the world. So that helps us also be very confident that Bitcoin cannot be debased. If held properly, Bitcoin is almost impossible to confiscate. Compare that with any other asset or property that you can think of: money, gold, precious gems, silver, properties, real estate, business interests. All of those things can be taken from you. And governments of the world, dictators, and conquering armies have shown time and time again that if they have an opportunity and the means to take that property from you, that will be done, and there's not a whole lot you can do about it. One beautiful thing about Bitcoin also is that it can be transferred around the world at the speed of light, thousands of times per second. There is no other property, no other asset in the world that you can do that with. Try transferring a bar of gold around the world at the speed of light, thousands of times per second. It just can't be done. And finally, I think very importantly, you can transport all of the Bitcoin you own with you in your head by simply memorizing your 12-word private key. And we won't get into that today. That's the subject of another video. But essentially, you can take your Bitcoin with you wherever you go just by memorizing these words and holding them in your mind. So, can Bitcoin save us from money printing? Yes, it can save us from the debasement of currency. That depends on adoption of Bitcoin around the world, and we are seeing that more and more. As we sit here today in 2022, there are about 600 million people who have adopted cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin. The rate of adoption is the fastest rate of adoption of technology ever recorded in the history of the world, even much faster, 3 times as fast as the adoption of the internet. And I truly believe that Bitcoin is an innovation that is going to bring democracy to the world of money and is the greatest opportunity of our lifetimes, of the past several generations, to increase your wealth, protect your wealth, and to protect your family. So if you don't know anything about Bitcoin, please do your research. Take a look at it, see if it's something that's right for you. Jump in and adopt it if you think it's right, because the faster and the more people that adopt it as a form of money, the more we can protect ourselves from a potential economic disaster. So with that said, hope you enjoyed the content, and until the next time, protect yourself out there.